Welcome to Counterpoint. I'm Tanya Granick-Allen. So another one bites the dust. For the third time in 5 years, grassroots members of the Conservative Party of Canada will be going to ballot boxes, or maybe mail-in ballots, to vote in a new leader now that Aaron O'Toole is gone. He is no longer leader, and Candace Bergen is the interim leader. So when will this all take place? Well, we know the leader will be announced and selected officially on September 10th, 2022. But what is the race looking like? What does a leadership contest normally look like? Who gets to vote? How long do people get to sign up to become a member if they want to vote? And most importantly, who do they get to vote for? Well, joining me today to share their perspectives and how this race will shape up is Mike Donison, a former lawyer and expert in election law, and Michael Diamond, a founder and owner of Upstream Strategy Group. Thank you both for joining me today.
Glad to be here.
Excellent. So I'm very excited. I always love leaderships. I ran in one myself. It's always an exciting time. Mike, maybe I'll start with you. What, so far that we know, how does this leadership look like it's shaping out?
Well, the rules are very similar to the last time. You're absolutely right. The new leader will be chosen on September 10th. Most of the voting will be by postal voting, we assume, although there is provision for some polling station, in-person voting. But I think most of it will be like last time, by postal.
And normally that is sort of how the federal Conservative Party has done their voting. I think for the last several goes, it's always pre-COVID. It's always been sort of postal.
That's correct. You have to be the people who are eligible, as long as you're a paid up member of the party by midnight on June the 3rd, you get a vote. It's a one person, one vote, except like last time, it's on this kind of complicated point system, very similar to the race you ran in. Everybody, the member of the party, gets a vote, but there's 100 points per riding. So it's not as strictly one person, one vote. And that was conducted the same way last two times. It'll be like that. There's big provisions now. Candidates, I don't know how they're going to meet these deadlines. By April 19th, they have to file. April 19th is deadline. And by April 29th, they have to bring in all their deposits, which is $200,000 non-refundable registration fee and $100,000 compliance deposit, which is returnable if they behave themselves. But that's $300,000 they have to raise alone by the 29th of April.
So, Michael Diamond, I'm going to ask you, bring you into the conversation. So, first of all, is $300,000, again, 100 of that refundable, is that really that unsurmountable? Is that a big amount of money to have to raise to enter the race?
Look, if you look at the last race, most of the candidates raised into well over $1 million in most cases. So it's not that the $300,000 will be hard for most of the serious candidates to get to. It's that the time frame makes it quite difficult, that they don't actually have a campaign infrastructure in place necessarily, and they're still trying to raise that money. So it will be an imposition to some, and that's probably too bad. If you look at the 2017 race, it was a much larger field than we expect this time, and certainly a larger field than we saw last time when it was $300,000, and some people were certainly shut out last time because of that that higher fee, which is probably unfortunate.
So, and let me ask you, Michael. So, Michael Diamond, when we're discussing that each riding will be worth the same amount, which regions or which ridings in Canada do you think should we really pay attention to, and which provinces do you feel will decide this race?
Look, it's all about going to, if you want to do this strategically, going to the ridings that have the smallest number of memberships. It's actually a conversation I had years ago with Mike Donison, and he introduced me to the term the Rotten Boroughs strategy, so that you'll want to go and increase the membership in those small ridings because one member will have a disproportionate advantage. There might be ridings in Alberta or some in Brampton where there's 10,000 members. They're going to get 100 votes, just like that small membership riding in Nova Scotia that has 125 members will get 100 electoral points towards the end. So Atlantic Canada punches above its weight. Quebec traditionally punches above its weight. This time there is one complication in that the riding will need to have 100 votes to have 100 points. Otherwise, it will be a point per vote. But Quebec will definitely punch above its weight. And then if you look at where the inefficient votes are, there's certainly Alberta, some of the larger urban centers in Ontario also, where it's a much more inefficient vote because of a large membership per riding.
Okay, and Mike Donison, is that a new amendment to a rule that if you don't have 100 members in a riding, then you won't be allotted that 100 points?
Yes, that's a recent amendment, but the 100 points has been with the party from its foundation. It was an
Okay, I'm going to pause you there
bill.
because I know you're going to give us a good history and I really want to hear that, but we've got to cut to commercial and we'll be right back in a few moments. Welcome back. We're discussing the Federal Conservative Party of Canada leadership race because, yes, we're in another one, third time in 5 years, and I'm very excited. I don't know about you. Maybe this is the first time you've ever watched on television the discussion of a leadership contest, but it's very important because whoever wins this leadership contest could very well become the next Prime Minister of Canada, and that could be the person who governs you. And joining me again is Mike Donison and Michael Diamond. Before we cut to commercial break, Mike Donison, we were discussing how each riding will be weighted the same amount of points, about 100. Unless they don't have 100 members, then they're not awarded the same amount. That's a recent amendment. Tell me a little bit more about this equal weighting.
The equal weighting, it came about as a result of the ultimate compromise when the old Progressive Conservative Party and the old Canadian Alliance united. And speaking about Peter MacKay, he insisted, because he realized that the PC party was much smaller than the old Reformed CA party. And they were very concerned about a one person, one vote would mean that side of the merged party would swamp the old PCs. And Mr. Harper agreed to compromise on that with 100 points. So it's one person, one vote, but it's balanced. And we've had that. That's in the Constitution, and the only innovation, as I say, recently, and if there's less than 100 votes actually counted, like say you have a small riding and only 80 people vote, well, it'll only get 80 points.
Okay, and then what happens to the other 20? Then it just gets distributed amongst the weight of the other ridings?
No, it's reduced.
They don't exist.
It's just reduced. Okay,
it's not in the pot.
Okay, good to know. Good to know. So it's a little different. We'll have to do a little bit more creative calculation, but here we go. So far, and correct me if I'm wrong, there are only 5 declared candidates. So it's a little bit more than last time. Well, that made it on the final ballot. I think there were 4 last time. So let's talk about the perceived front runner, Michael Diamond, Pierre Poilievre. We've seen his name in the news. He sort of was trying to make a run of it the last leadership in 2019, 2020, but then withdrew or didn't formally declare, and that surprised many of us. But now he was the first out of the gate to formally declare. What do you think of his prospects as a candidate?
Look, I think he's undoubtedly the front runner in this race, which is not necessarily a bad place to begin. But if you look at recent history, it's also a very bad place if you look at the results. So it's certainly not a clear path, but he definitely has some huge advantages, mainly his cross-Canada reach and his social media presence. His launch video when he announced his run got millions of views on various platforms in a very short time, that he was competing, frankly, with a larger viewership than your average CFL game would receive. So really can really grow the party, I think, in different regions and with different demographics, which will be a key for his success. If you look at the Carleton Riding Association, which is his, and you look at their annual returns, they receive way more donations from out of the riding than inside the riding, which I think to me is a clear sign that he has, unlike some other MPs, a huge advantage in this race because he actually has friends and fans in the party across the country.
So Mike Donison, some have suggested that Pierre Poilievre is the populist candidate, that he is the one that will tap into the populist wing. But didn't they all leave and join the PPC? And if Pierre Poilievre is the winner, what does that mean for the PPC?
Well, no, I don't think that all the so-called populists in the party left for the People's Party. In fact, I would think of the 800,000 votes that party got, half of them people who never voted, quite frankly, in politics. But I think you raised a good point, and I think that Pierre represents, and if you contrast him to Mr. Charest, and we'll get to him, I guess, I mentioned to you offline, I think that these two candidates represent the real true fault lines in the Conservative Party. The populist elitists, which you alluded to, also the sort of true blue conservative, versus the sort of Quebec liberal, that kind of issue. I think that the old politics versus the new, Pierre very much represents, I think, for good or bad, a newer kind of in-your-face, frank, and if I can say so, no BS kind of approach to politics. Right. Mr. Charest give him respect, is very much of the old school. Jean Charest
Right.
represents, and I've been listening to him, and he fudges on all the issues. And that's the way old politics was. He's very good at it. Mr.
And I
Charest is
think,
very good at that.
we have information bombardment, so much information overload, social media, traditional media, that I think you're right. There are Canadians who just want someone who will just cut through it and give them the straight goods. Do you think his prospects are very good, Michael Diamond?
Pierre Poilievre, yes. I think, just because of that clear, concise message he's delivered, which has resonated with Conservative members for many years. That's why there was a lot of hope he'd run last time. He has a clear advantage in this race.
Okay, we're going to take a break. And when we return, we're going to discuss another potential challenger, Jean Charest, who just recently declared. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're continuing our discussion of the Conservative Party of Canada leadership race that's taking place and will be announced the new leader in September 10th. 2022. Michael Diamond, before we cut to commercial, we were sort of leading into Jean Charest and his candidacy. So far, he is the only declared candidate from Quebec. Knowing how regional how the votes will be distributed per riding, and you suggested that it's a real voter-rich area to sign up people in Quebec. How do you think his prospects look at this juncture?
Well, taking an outsider from Quebec's view of this, it should be a very easy path for Charest to have a big impact in this race. But, that said, it was only 2014 that he actually lost a provincial election in Quebec. He also lost his own seat in that election. That's a seat he held when the Progressive Conservative Party of Canada was decimated to 2 seats. He was one of those 2 seats. And as an incumbent premier, he lost that seat in Sherbrooke in 2014 to the PQ forming a minority government. So it's not necessarily such a slam dunk for Mr. Charest in Quebec. We saw some polling from Léger last week that showed that Mr. Poilievre actually had a bit of an advantage on him in Quebec with the general population. That said, he has an organization that's in place. He has a long-time network of friends in the province. So I do suspect his strength will be in Quebec. It just won't make up for some of the deficiencies his campaign will have in other regions of the country.
Okay, that's very interesting, that polling, considering that Pierre Poilievre is, I guess, a francophone, but from actually Calgary. So it's a very interesting mix of candidates we have here. Mike Donison, as maybe our viewers aren't aware, but actually Jean Charest, who previously, he actually ran once before for the head of the PC party before the two parties merged in the early 90s, and he lost to then Kim Campbell. He then became later on the Liberal Premier of Quebec. How do you think that may help or work against him in this leadership?
I think within the party, it's going to be a problem. I don't think outside the party it's an issue. I mean, the reality is that provincial politics are quite different from federal. And he was the federal. I think he can combat that fairly easy by saying, I was the Federalist alternative in Quebec, and that the Liberal Party is the Federalist alternative then. So I don't think that's going to do a lot of harm. The other thing I think, though, he's got a problem on a couple of issues. And one of them is, although I saw an interview with him, which he handled fairly well, there is this issue, the fact that he was in the private sector, a lobbyist, and worked for Huawei, worked for the Chinese government state organization.
I was waiting for you to bring that up because I want to talk about that.
He batted it back, not badly, but there's still some questions about.
Of course, there are questions. Of what if he becomes leader? What, if any, would the CCP, the Communist Chinese Party, would their influence be on Mr. Charest, knowing that he had as a client Huawei?
Now, to be fair to him, he handled the question. I think it was on another network. I won't mention the name. Was Evan Solomon. He was interviewed by Evan, and he handled the question very well. But there's still a lot of doubts about whether he's been fulsome in his answer in terms of his role.
Well, I guess that's the beauty of a leadership campaign. It tends to flush out these dramas. So we will probably see that in the coming days. And speaking of drama, Patrick Brown, the former leader of the Ontario PC party, now mayor of Brampton, has thrown his hat in the ring. Michael Diamond, were you surprised?
Yes, I was absolutely surprised. I think, Patrick is a street fighter and he's a hard worker, and no one can take away that from him. And he's an expert organizer, and that will have impacts both in urban centers in Ontario and across the country, but also in some of the rural ridings where he really will tap into networks that will surprise a lot of people. But I am surprised. We all know the story of how he left and why he was pushed out of leader of the Progressive Conservative Party just months before the 2018 election. He certainly had a political resurrection in his election as mayor of Brampton. And it seems to me that he's risking a lot by running in this leadership. But that said, he's probably a much stronger competitor from the left of the party, which is where I'd say he currently resides. He's sort of all over the place, but he's now, I'd say, currently on the left of the party. And he's a stronger competitor from that perspective to Mr. Poilievre than Mr. Charest is, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with you. He definitely has hustle. He can really recruit, and he's shown that even in his provincial leadership. One thing I found surprising, though, and we'll talk about it when we come back to it after the break, is he was found to have 4 breaches of ethics violations during his time when he was leader of the Ontario PC party. Mike Donison, is it possible that LEOC, the organizing committee, in the 15 seconds we have left, could approve someone with those kinds of ethics violations to run to be the leader of their party?
Well, I don't want to prejudge them. You know this better than I do. There is
actually, you know what? I'm going to pause you there. Sorry, to do this again. Sorry. We've got to cut to commercial, and we're going to pick up this in just a few moments. Welcome back. We're continuing our discussion on the Federal Conservative Party of Canada leadership race. Mike Donison, just before we cut to commercial, we're discussing Patrick Brown, and I brought up these 4 breaches of ethics that violations that he was found to have had when he was leader of the PC party on Ontario. Is there a chance that the LEOC, the Leadership Organizing Committee that kind of governs this race federally, that they might not approve him because of such a thing? Do they have it in their power to say no?
Well, they certainly have it in their power, and they don't even have to give reasons. To summarize, there's a bit of an aroma, if I may use that word, coming from his previous leadership of the provincial PC party. So I think it's going to be a problem. It'll be in the hands of LEOC for them to decide. I'd be surprised if they did. I mean, because a lot of these are allegations, and a lot of it's old. But conceivably, they can disqualify anybody they want.
But he was investigated by the Ethics Commission in Ontario, so it was a serious thing. Let's move on from Patrick. Leslyn Lewis, she won the popular vote after Derek Sloan dropped off the ballot, but did not win in that distributed riding count. So, what are her chances now at her second shot at this? Michael Diamond, what do you think?
Look, I think she's actually probably a more serious competitor in this race than Jean Charest, and she should be covered a bit more fulsomely because of that. That said, she certainly beat expectations last time, going from virtually an unknown person to winning the popular vote on the second round, as you said. But this time, it's a very different challenge for her. Last time, she also benefited, frankly, from 2 candidates who didn't have a lot of credibility with some of the social conservative elements within the party base. Pierre Poilievre runs, in my opinion, much stronger on those issues and with that base because of his authenticity than Aaron O'Toole, who blatantly lied to SOCONs, and Peter MacKay, who decided not to lie to SOCONs. So I think this time she will not benefit from having 2 candidates who either were being bad at playing footsie with the SOCONs or chose not to, because Pierre Poilievre just has a bit more authenticity to him in his stances on those issues.
So even though he's, not pro-life and he's declared himself on a variety of issues that generally would not be in keeping with social conservative voters, he still, you think, has more authenticity?
Well, then Aaron O'Toole, absolutely, because he's certainly being upfront about it. And unlike, Peter MacKay chose not to play footsie with him, Pierre Poilievre is certainly someone who is credible in wanting to have a big tent conservatism with fair and open nominations. That's something that's going to hurt Mr. Brown, by the way. And I think that will be better received by social conservatives than the previous opponents of Dr. Lewis last time. I think you're also seeing even some of her endorsers from last time already jumping on to Mr. Poilievre's campaign.
Okay, and Mike Donison, the social conservatives, I know they were always a huge factor. They've sort of pretty much selected the winner the last few times because of down ballot support. Do you expect that to happen again?
I don't know. I think Michael's right. I think most of social conservatives will probably, because I really think this election is, I'm going to predict it's going to come down to Charest versus Polyev. I really do. And I think those are reflections. And I think most of the social conservatives on their preferences will overwhelmingly go for Pierre on that split. But I really think this is down to Charest versus Polyev. And a comment I was thinking, this comes from American politics. I think these two gentlemen represent the real divide in the party. And if you like, it's kind of those who think that a conservative party in Canada should be a choice, not an echo, versus those who think that we should just be a modified echo. I really do. I think that summarizes the divide. And it also means that I think Pierre Poilievre has a much better chance of winning the party, winning the leadership over Mr. Charest. However, Mr. Charest may have a much better chance at winning the general electorate.
Okay. Well, we only have a minute left, and I want to get to Roman Baber, independent Ontario MPP. He was booted out of caucus by Premier Doug Ford because he was so outspoken against the lockdowns and the mandates. You know, I think he is the only one really who's credible to speak that has been consistent for the last, I guess, year and a half against these lockdowns. But I've noticed that, you know, other candidates now are kind of posturing that they're against lockdowns. And when the trucker convoy came in, they were also posturing to be a bit more to something that would be Roman Baber's position. Michael, will he be a factor in this race?
Well, he absolutely will be. Roman's a friend of mine. He's a very smart guy. I certainly don't agree with him on a lot of things, but what he's going to play in this race is a place for people to park their first ballot selection as a signal to folks that what happened was not something they agreed with. It will be a way to say no.
Okay. Well, that's all the time we have today. Thank you both so very much for joining us. And we will obviously be staying very tuned to this race, and we'll keep you posted here on Counterpoint as things develop. For Counterpoint, I'm Tanya Granick-Allen.